and I'm dripping with sweat. Okay, so this heat is clearly messing with my head. It's crazy, like it's insane. Really, really hot out here. Like it must be, I'm guessing the Humidex. If it's possible, the Humidex is probably like 55 degrees. Hey everyone, it's Jo. I'm the Kosher Ninja, and we've been talking about my adventure last year hiking on the Shvil Israel, or Israel National Trail. If you're new here, welcome. I'm so glad you've stopped by, and while you're here, go check out my videos from the Shvil, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when I post new videos. But right now, we're going to talk about the climate in Israel, how it's going to affect your adventure, and how you should prepare. At the end, I'm going to tell you how I am tougher than an Israeli, but maybe not quite as smart. The last few times we've talked about the need to plan your adventure while keeping it general and flexible, and also the need to train physically. I've warned you several times about the climate, but really haven't said much about it other than to say that we'll get back to it. So here we go. We've said before that Israel has two hiking seasons as far as the Shvil is concerned. There's the spring season and the fall season, and never the twain shall meet. So in the spring, you hike northbound, and that way you avoid the heat of the desert and move north as it gets warmer. In the fall, you hike southbound, and that way you reach the desert after the worst of the summer heat has died down. 2 weeks ago, I had mentioned that the spring season is over and the fall season won't be starting until September. We've also talked about how it's not recommended to hike the Shvil in the winter, and it's not exactly prohibited, but it's sort of unofficially prohibited to hike the Shvil in the summer. And just to give you a bit of a point of reference, right now it's the end of May, and you can't see that thermometer because it's out of focus, but it lies. It says it's 10 degrees. It's actually about 14 degrees, and it should be warmer than that. It's a bit of a cool spring day, but beautiful. Other than that, the sun is gorgeous, and somebody is mowing his lawn and wrecking my video, so sorry about that. Anyways, in Tel Aviv, right now in Tel Aviv, I'm checking my trusty app here. It is 10:30 at night and it's 21 degrees. So that's pretty normal, you might say, for sort of a June summer day. But 2 weeks ago, I had checked the forecast just for the fun of it, and it said 41 degrees in the middle of May. There was a whole week in there where the temperature in Tel Aviv was between 41 and 43 degrees every day, and that's not even factoring in the humidity. So if you're actually serious about hiking the Shvil and you want to enjoy the experience, you're not even going to be thinking about hiking in the summer or really the winter, so we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the weather in the spring and in the fall. If I asked you what you know about the climate in Israel, the first thing you'd think about would be the desert, and you'd be absolutely right. But it's not just the desert. Israel is a tiny country, but it's so diverse, and geography and climate is no exception. So it can actually snow on Mount Hermon in April, while at that same time in Eilat, only a 6-hour drive away, the average monthly temperature is 31 degrees. Now, you may live in Northern Europe and already have a sneaking suspicion that the climate's going to be an issue for you, or maybe you live somewhere semi-tropical or in the American Southwest and you're like, so how bad can it be? Well, I can't promise that I can make you appreciate exactly how the climate is going to affect you, but I'll certainly try. And while I may not know exactly what it's like where you live and train, I do have some experience in some different climates. I've lived in southern Canada and in northern Europe and in northern Virginia, so basically on the border with the south. And I've also spent some significant time in Israel. Now, that last point is important. Before my Shvil adventure, I had spent a total of 6 months in Israel over 4 visits. 2 shorter visits in the spring and 1 in the fall, and 1 3-month volunteer experience in the fall. Now, it's this 3-month experience or visit that we're particularly interested in because the timing fell almost identical to my Shvil adventure. Now, granted, this was in 2003, so a while ago, but it left quite an impression, although apparently not quite enough. First, you need to understand something about me. I have always loved the summer and the heat and humidity. Unfortunately, my skin does not love the sun, but other than that, I actually think I'm a reptile. Give me a hot, humid summer day, and everybody around me is like, ugh, it's so hot, I'm dying. Where's the AC? Meanwhile, I'm like, phew, my bone marrow has finally thawed. Okay, guys, what are we gonna do today? So, 2003, I arrive in Israel in mid-September, and after about 3 weeks based just south of Tel Aviv, I was done with the sun. It just wouldn't stop blasting from a clear blue sky, and it wasn't that beautiful sort of 20 degrees-ish September day like back home. It was over 30 degrees every single day, and that's not counting for humidity, with not a cloud in sight. It just went on and on and on. And just to prove that I'm serious, this is the forecast for the next 2 weeks in Tel Aviv. So I had this memory in mind as I was preparing for the Shvil. I knew it was going to be brutal, but time really does have a way of watering things down. To be fair though, 20 years ago I was not carrying a 15-kilo pack on my back, and I spent my days in a shaded workshop. Sure, well, that's the fall hiking season, you say. What about the spring? Well, personally, I'm not too keen about hiking in the spring. Remember that part I said about preferring a hot, humid day? But the spring season is the more popular hiking season, and with good reason. The rains make the desert flower, and the whole country is just green and in bloom. And most people will find it more comfortable than the fall. However, you do have to watch out for flash floods, and those precious rains come down hard and cold. Also, if you leave too early, then you'll still have to deal with those rains up in the north, and it just won't be as pleasant. And as you work your way up north, you will still have to deal, as spring progresses, you'll still have to deal with the heat and humidity issues, although I guess the benefit in that is that you'll be easing into it, unlike in the north where basically it's 50-degree humidex from day one. For those of you who have done the Appalachian Trail or a part of it, I know it can get pretty hot and humid as you're passing through the eastern seaboard in the middle of summer, but it's still not going to give you the Shvil experience. And there's a few reasons for that. First of all, you're going to be most of that time at higher elevations where it doesn't get as hot or humid. Secondly, it rains from time to time. And thirdly, the AT isn't affectionately known as the Green Tunnel for nothing. It gives you something precious that you won't see much of on the Shvil, which is shade. And finally, on the AT, you don't have to carry all your water. On the PCT and the CDT, there is some desert hiking, and I truthfully don't know enough about it, but my understanding is that it's fairly early in the hike and before the heat of the summer, and most of the rest of the way you're hiking up at higher elevations, which take you away from the heat and humidity and give you rain and snow. And you also don't have to carry all your water. But what about if you haven't hiked one of the Great American Trails, but you live somewhere sort of semi-tropical where you've done all your hiking and you're used to the heat and humidity? Well, you're probably also accustomed to daily or near daily rainfall, which clears the air and makes everything much more comfortable. Well, you're not going to get that on the Shvil in the fall at all. And I know you're going to say it rained for me while I was on the Shvil, but it was exceptional, and everybody said that. And that one particular day with a thunderstorm, like that had to be pretty almost historic. Usually doesn't rain that early. And in the spring, the rains are just going to make you cold. And the other thing you probably don't have experience with is the heat of the day and the cold of the night that you're going to get in the desert. And you probably have not had to carry all your water. So how does anybody prepare for this? It sounds hopeless. Well, it's not hopeless. The Shvil is absolutely doable, but you do have to be prepared. And this is why we can't emphasize enough the importance of getting creative with how you train so that your physical fitness is adequate. Because, well, very few people have a sauna that's big enough to train in. I don't know, Death Valley maybe? Next, you're going to have to plan your gear very carefully. Did I mention that the biggest problem is going to be that you have to carry all your water? The most significant way in which the Israeli climate is going to affect your Shvil experience and your need to prepare is in your need for water and hydration. And this is going to be, first of all, greater than on the other major trails. And second of all, unlike the other trails, you're actually going to have to carry it all. Now, I know that water needs differ depending on the person, and we're going to talk about water strategy in a different video, but just to give you an idea, any given time on the Shvil, you're going to need to be carrying between 2 and 6 kilos of water. So in addition to being physically fit so that you can actually carry that weight of water, you're going to want to do everything possible to minimize the weight of everything else in your pack. And in this case, it's not about showing off, but it's about managing the climate and your comfort level. So if you're already an ultralighter, great. If not, or you're on the cusp, take everything that's unnecessary and dump it. Be ruthless. And for those things that you really and truly cannot live without, bite the bullet and go ultralight. And don't worry, like I said, the Shvil is only 2 months and a little bit more if you build in that flexibility that I told you about. And there's a lot of things you're going to find out really quickly that you really don't need, that you might actually want to have with you on the AT or the CDT or PCT, but you really don't need on the Shvil. And I promise you, you really don't need 7 shirts and 5 pairs of pants. So being physically fit and paring down your pack to the barest essentials are the #1 way to manage the climate on your Shvil. #2 is let the sun plan your hike. What I mean by this is get up before the sun, oy vey, and hit the Shvil as soon as you can see the trail. Hike as much as you can in those cool or cooler morning hours, taking lots of little mini breaks. And then around 11 o'clock, find a good place of shade and take a nice major break. Eat your lunch, take a snooze, take a dip in a spring, read a book in that e-reader I just told you to leave behind that I know you brought anyways. And then continue your way after about 3 o'clock. The earlier in the spring and the later in the fall, especially outside of daylight savings time, the trickier this is going to be. You're going to want to be in camp by about 4 o'clock, especially in the desert where you have to sleep in designated night camps, so that you can have time to set up camp before it gets dark. Later in the spring and earlier in the fall, you can stretch it to about 6 o'clock, which will help, but you're also going to be leaving later in the morning and you're going to want a longer break during the heat of the day. Speaking of breaks in the heat of the day, I said I was going to tell you how I was tougher than the Israelis. Well, they would take my advice. They would get up early in the morning and start hiking, sometimes when it was even still dark out. Then around 11 o'clock, they'd find a shady spot or a spring and they'd just chill out for a nice long break until about 2 or even later. Me, I like my sleep. And I also like the heat. Or maybe it's not even so much that I like the heat, but I really, really dislike the cold, which is basically anything below 25 degrees. So I would leave after the sun came up and I would end up having to hike well into midday just to make the distance and to catch up with my Israelis and find the break spot. Then I would get half or maybe even a quarter of the break that they did, and we'd have to be up and at it again. So they kept telling me, you have to take a break at lunchtime. It's just too hot to hike in the middle of the day. That was my Israelis. Well, I would just get up the next day and do the same thing all over again. So yeah, definitely tougher than an Israeli, but they were clearly much, much smarter. So, are you planning for the Shvil Israel or for another trail? Are you a hot weather hiker like me or a cool camper? Tell me about it down in the comments section down below. If you've liked this video, give me a thumbs up and subscribe, ring the notification bell, and share with your friends. If you've hiked the Shvil Israel and have anything helpful to add or even just interesting, tell us about it in the comments down below. I'd love to hear from you. I'm so excited that we get to share our journeys and adventures in this way, and I can't wait to see you again next time. Until then, thanks for watching and shalom, eh?